You're looking at the edge of the water and you don't know it yet, but you're staring at the exact spot where a teenage boy cried so hard in 1637 that his tears literally changed the future of an entire region. Not metaphorically, actually changed it. Because those tears became food. They became an industry. They became the reason millions of people would never starve. And the thing is, he had every reason to cry. Everyone he loved was dead. He was 15, maybe 16 years old, and he'd just watched armed men slaughter his entire village, his parents, his friends, everyone, and he was the only one left. Just him, alone, starving, sitting by a river that didn't care if he lived or died. But here's where it gets weird. Really weird. Because after days of crying, something heard him. Something came out of that water. And what happened next is so strange that people in Cachoeira do Sul, Brazil, still talk about it almost 400 years later. They built an entire economy around it. The largest rice fair in South America exists because of what happened to that boy. But nobody talks about the terrifying part. Nobody talks about what that thing in the water actually was, or what it wanted, or why it chose him. And when you hear the full story, when you understand what really went down on the banks of the Jacuí River in 1637, you're going to realize this isn't just some cute folklore about agriculture. This is a story about survival, about something ancient making a deal with a dying child, and about how sometimes the things that save us are the same things we should probably be afraid of. Let me take you back. Let me show you exactly what happened. Because there are 3 stories here. 3 moments that connect in ways that'll make your skin crawl, and by the end, you're going to see your dinner plate very differently. You're going to understand that sometimes legends aren't just stories. Sometimes they're warnings wrapped in hope. Sometimes they're contracts we never agreed to, but benefit from every single day. And this one started with a massacre. The year is 1637. The place is what we now call Rio Grande do Sul in southern Brazil, but back then it was just indigenous land. Forests that stretched forever, rivers that fed communities that had existed for thousands of years. The Guarani people had been there since before anyone started writing down dates. They had their villages, their farming, their families, their whole world. And then the Bandeirantes came. If you don't know what Bandeirantes were, think of them as colonial mercenaries. Portuguese raiders who pushed into the interior of Brazil looking for slaves and gold and anything valuable they could grab. They were brutal, efficient. They didn't negotiate. Raposo Tavares was leading this particular expedition, and his crew was moving through the region destroying Jesuit missions, these protected settlements where indigenous people lived under the supervision of Jesuit priests. The Jesuits tried to shield the native populations from slavery, which made them targets. Raposo Tavares didn't care about protection or religion or anything except his mission. So his men swept through. They burned the missions. They killed the priests. They killed the indigenous people or dragged them away in chains. And in one of those villages, there was a boy named Tuti. Tuti was young, probably 15 or 16. Old enough to understand what was happening, not old enough to stop it. The attack came fast. Screaming, fire, the sound of gunshots echoing through trees that had never heard anything like it before. Tuti ran. He didn't have a choice. He ran while his parents fell behind him. He ran while his friends were cut down. He ran until he couldn't hear the screaming anymore, until the only sound was his own breath and the distant rush of the river. The Jacuí River. That's where he ended up. Alone. Completely. Devastatingly alone. Everyone was gone. His family, his people, his entire world had been erased in a single afternoon, and now he was sitting on the bank of this river with nothing. No food, no shelter, no one to tell him what to do next. Just a teenage boy staring at water, trying to process the fact that he was the only one left. So he cried. Of course he cried. What else was there to do? He cried for days. The historical accounts, the versions of this legend that get passed down, they all mention this part. Tuti sat by the Jacuí River and he wept. Not just sad crying, but the kind of soul-destroying grief that comes from losing everything at once, the kind that empties you out. And his tears fell into the river, one after another, mixing with the water, disappearing into the current. Here's where the story splits. Here's where it stops being a tragedy and becomes something else. Because on the third day, maybe the fourth, sources vary, Tuti was still crying, still starving, still waiting to die, probably, when something changed. The light shifted, the air got warmer, and out of the water, right in front of him, something emerged. The descriptions are always the same: a figure, a woman, not entirely solid, not entirely made of flesh. She glowed. Her form seemed to shift between the colors of the river, the sky, the surrounding forest, greens and blues and silvers all moving across her skin like she was made of the landscape itself. Her hair caught the sunlight, reflecting it back in ways that didn't make physical sense. And she looked at Tuti with eyes that were impossibly old and impossibly kind at the same time. Tuti should have been terrified. Any rational person would have been. You're starving and hallucinating and something comes out of the river? You run. But he didn't run. Maybe he was too weak. Maybe he knew somehow that this thing wasn't there to hurt him. Or maybe he just didn't care anymore whether he lived or died. The entity spoke. Her voice was like water itself, flowing and soft, but carrying weight. She told Tuti she had been watching. She had seen what happened to his village. She had felt his tears falling into a river, and she had collected them. All of them. Every single tear that had dropped into the Jacuí over those days of mourning. She had gathered them, held them, transformed them, and now she had something for him. She opened her hands, and in her palms were seeds, small, pale, grain-like seeds that seemed to glow with the same soft light that surrounded her. "These are your tears," she said. "I have changed them. Plant these, and they will grow. They will feed you. They will feed your children and their children and everyone who comes after. Your pain will become sustenance. Your grief will become life. This is my gift to you, Tuti. You will never starve again." And then she was gone. Just like that. Back into the water, dissolving into the current, leaving Tuti alone on the bank with a handful of seeds and the echo of her voice in his head. He should have thought he imagined it. He should have assumed it was a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by grief and hunger. But the seeds were real. He could feel them in his hand, solid and warm and undeniably there. So he did what she said. He planted them. Right there along the banks of the Jacuí River, in soil that was still damp from the water, Tuti pressed those seeds into the earth and waited. And they grew. Fast. Faster than any plant should grow. Within weeks, the riverbank was covered in stalks of green, tall and strong and heavy with grain. Rice. It was rice. The first rice anyone in that region had ever seen growing wild like that, thick and abundant and seemingly endless. Tuti harvested it. He ate. For the first time since the massacre, he wasn't hungry. The pain didn't go away, the grief was still there, crushing and constant, but he wasn't going to die. And as more people came through the region, survivors from other villages, travelers, settlers, they saw what Tuti had. They asked where it came from. He told them the story. Some believed him, some didn't. But everyone took seeds, everyone planted, and the rice kept growing, fast forward almost 400 years. Cachoeira do Sul is now known as the national capital of rice in Brazil. It's a huge deal. They host Fenaroz, the National Rice Fair, one of the biggest agricultural events in the entire Mercosul region. Thousands of people attend, millions of dollars in rice trade hands. The entire local economy revolves around this single crop that, according to legend, came from the tears of a grieving teenager and the magic of a river spirit. You can dismiss it as folklore. You can say it's just a nice story people tell to explain why rice grows so well in that region. But here's the thing. The rice industry there is real. The connection people feel to that legend is real. And the older generations, the families who've been farming that land for centuries, they don't treat it like a fairy tale. They treat it like history. They'll tell you about Tuti like he was their ancestor. They'll point to specific spots along the Jacuí and say that's where it happened. That's where the woman appeared. That's where the first rice grew. And some of them, if you ask quietly, away from tourists and cameras, will tell you they still see her sometimes. The woman from the river. They'll say she appears during droughts or during floods, or when the harvest is struggling. They'll say she watches over the rice fields because those fields are hers. They came from her, from the deal she made with a broken boy 4 centuries ago. But what was she? That's the question nobody wants to answer directly. The legend calls her a spirit, an entity, a protector of the river. Some versions say she was a manifestation of the land itself, the physical embodiment of nature responding to human suffering. Some say she was a goddess, an old deity from indigenous mythology who took pity on Tuti. But there's another interpretation, one that's darker and more uncomfortable. What if she wasn't benevolent? What if what happened on that riverbank wasn't a gift, but a transaction? Think about it. Tuti gave her his tears, his pain, his grief. That's not nothing. In every mythology, in every tradition of magic and spirits and entities making deals with humans, emotion has power, suffering has weight. What if that's what she wanted? What if she collected his tears not out of kindness, but because they were valuable, because they could be used, because pain is currency in ways we don't like to think about? And in exchange, she gave him rice. She gave him survival. But she also tied him to that land forever. She tied his descendants to it. Every person who eats that rice, every farmer who plants those seeds, is continuing the cycle that started with Tuti's tears. They're participating in something that goes back to a deal made between a dying boy and something ancient that came out of the water when it smelled blood and grief. Maybe that sounds paranoid. Maybe it sounds like I'm turning a beautiful legend into something sinister. But consider this. The woman never appears when things are good. The sightings, the stories of her returning, they always happen during crisis. During droughts when the rice won't grow. During floods when the fields are drowning. During economic crashes when the harvest fails. She shows up when the land is suffering, when the people are desperate. Why? What is she checking on? What is she making sure still happens? And why rice specifically? Why did she transform tears into that particular crop? Rice needs water, a lot of it. It grows in flooded fields, in paddies that are deliberately kept saturated. It's a crop that requires the land to be submerged, to be under the control of water, her element, her domain. She didn't give Tuti wheat or corn or any crop that grows in dry soil. She gave him something that would keep people tied to the river, that would require them to work with water, to manage it, to respect it, to never forget that the river is the source. She gave him a crop that makes sure every generation remembers her. That's not a gift. That's a chain. And Tuti? What happened to him after? The legend doesn't say. He plants the rice, it grows, he shares it, and then he disappears from the story. No mention of how he died, where he went, whether he ever found peace or started a family or lived to see what his tears became. It's like he was only important for that one moment, that one transaction, and once it was complete, he didn't matter anymore. Used up, consumed. The only thing that matters, the only thing that continues, is the rice, the crop, the thing she created. His tears keep feeding people, but Tuti himself is forgotten. Doesn't that feel wrong? Doesn't that feel like something terrible masquerading as something beautiful? A boy loses everything, cries his heart out, and a supernatural entity transforms that suffering into an economic resource that benefits everyone except him. He's not celebrated. His name barely survives in the legend. The fields are named after the town, the industry, the region, not after Tuti. He's a footnote in his own story. And the woman, the entity, she gets altars. She gets reverence. Farmers leave offerings by the river during planting season. They pray to her for good harvests. They thank her. But what about Tuti? Who thanks him? Who remembers that it was his pain, his loss, his tears that started everything? This is what gets me about this legend. This is why it's not just a cute origin story for rice cultivation. It's a story about extraction, about something taking grief and turning it into profit, about a system that was founded on trauma and now runs so smoothly that people forget there was trauma at the beginning. They just see the rice. They just see the abundance. They don't think about the cost. And maybe that's intentional. Maybe that's part of the design. Keep people focused on the harvest, on the food, on the economy, and they won't ask uncomfortable questions about where it came from. They won't wonder what was really happening on that riverbank in 1637. They won't think about the fact that an entire region's prosperity is built on the transformed tears of a genocide survivor who cried himself into dehydration and hallucination. Because that's a horrifying foundation. That's not something you put on a poster at the agricultural fair. But it's the truth. Or at least it's the truth inside the legend. So here we are, almost 400 years later. The rice still grows. Cachoeira do Sul still thrives. The Fenaros still happens every year, celebrating the grain that feeds millions. And somewhere, in the waters of the Jacuí River, maybe something still watches. Maybe it's satisfied with how things turned out. Maybe it collects more tears when new tragedies happen, stores them away for the next crisis, the next drought, the next moment when the land needs to be reminded of the contract. Or maybe it's gone. Maybe Tuti was the only transaction it ever needed. One boy's grief converted into endless generations of crops, an efficient trade that keeps paying dividends forever without requiring any more input. That would be smart. That would be the perfect deal. Extract everything from one source, transform it into something self-sustaining, and then step back and watch it multiply. That's not benevolence. That's investment. That's power. And you know what the really terrifying part is? We can't stop. Even if this whole legend is true, even if there was something predatory and extractive about what happened to Tuti, it doesn't matter. The rice is here now. The industry exists. Millions of people depend on it for food, for income, for survival. We can't undo it. We can't give Tuti his tears back. We can't break whatever contract he made with the woman in the river. All we can do is keep planting, keep harvesting, keep eating, keep participating in a system that started with unimaginable pain and now looks like abundance. That's the real horror. Not that something supernatural might have exploited a grieving child, but that even if it did, we're stuck with the results. We benefit from it. And deep down, maybe we don't want to know the truth, because the truth won't change anything. The rice tastes the same either way. So think about that next time you see rice on your plate. Think about Cachoeira do Sul and the Jacuí River and a 15-year-old boy who lost everything and cried until something hurt him. Think about what he gave up, even if he didn't realize he was giving it up, and what we all received in return. And maybe, just maybe, say thank you, not to the woman in the river, not to the legend or the industry or the land, but to Tuti, the boy whose tears fed the future, the boy whose name we barely remember, the boy who made a deal he never understood so that centuries later we wouldn't starve. He deserves that much. He deserves to be more than a ghost in his own story. And if you're ever near the Jacuí River, if you're ever in Cachoeira do Sul during harvest season, pay attention to the water. See if anything moves under the surface. See if you feel watched. Because maybe she's still there. Maybe she's always been there. And maybe, just maybe, she's still collecting tears. Just in case.